In my review video for Smalland Survive the Wilds, I made a point to not compare it to Grounded as I wanted to judge it on its own. Not surprisingly, a common question I've received from that video, and more so during my live streams of Smalland, is which game is better. Today I'm going to look at what both games have to offer to try to determine if one is better than the other. I want to start off by answering a question I saw quite frequently while watching a larger streamer play Smalland: is it a ripoff of Grounded? While it may seem to be since Grounded has been fully released, the answer is no. Development for Smalland started in January 2017 per their Indiegogo page for the game. Development for Grounded started sometime in 2018 per a GamesIndustry.biz article. With that out of the way, let's briefly take a look at what each game had to offer for their early access launch. Grounded launched into early access on July 28, 2020. At launch, the game had about an hour of story content. There was one biome, the Grasslands, which was mostly populated, with much of the backyard empty or only containing placeholder assets. While I didn't encounter it myself, I believe an early version of the Broodmother was in the game, although it wasn't a fully fleshed out boss fight like it is now. There were also base raids, but they were quickly patched out due to a technical issue causing far too many mobs to spawn. Grounded was pretty bare bones for its early access launch, especially when looking at it now. Smalland Survive the Wilds released into early access on March 29, 2023. At launch, it has approximately 20 hours of story content. There are 6 biomes that are complete and some outer areas of the map that are inaccessible and are planned to be updated in the future. Smalland launched with 4 bosses and 2 mini-bosses. The developers of Smalland seem to have taken the route of waiting to enter early access until the game had a good amount of content. That's a high-level summary of what the two games had to offer on day one of their early access. Now let's take a look at what both games offer right now. In short, Grounded is a complete game. You can play through the story from start to finish, and it will take approximately 20 to 30 hours if it's your first playthrough, and you avoid any spoilers, guides, etc. Smalland, as mentioned, has a similar amount of content right now, but the story cannot be completed. At this point, I'm not sure exactly how much of the Smalland story is available, but from looking at the current content and the roadmap, I would estimate that it's around 75% complete. If I'm correct, that would mean the story for Smalland will be about the same length as the story for Grounded, maybe a little longer, but not by much. Grounded released into early access on PC via Steam and into game preview for both Xbox consoles and via the Windows Store on PC. It was and is available in both console and PC Game Pass. It was priced at $29.99 for its early access launch and is now $39.99. Smalland, on the other hand, is available only on PC via Steam and the Epic Games Store, and it costs $24.99. I believe it was also planned for consoles, but at this time there is no indication if or when it will be ported. In fact, the roadmap makes no mention of a console port, so it would seem that would only occur if the game is super successful on PC and or if Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo decide it's worth paying to have it ported. Both Grounded and Smalland have a cartoony visual appearance, with Grounded going for the more cartoon side and Smalland going for the more realistic side. Personally, I'm a fan of the more cartoony look for games, so I prefer the way Grounded looks. On the other hand, Smalland absolutely wins when it comes to performance, especially when it compares to the day one version of Grounded. In my 20 plus hours of Smalland, I've had no crashes, only very minor stutters when entering the open world for the first time. Co-op ran extremely smooth when playing as a guest, and this was all with graphical settings on high. At launch, Grounded was pretty rough, especially for guests, and even now after it has been fully released, it's hit or miss with some players experiencing lag, desync, and disconnections when playing as a guest on someone else's world. First, let's take a look at the things I think Grounded does better than Smalland. The characters and NPCs are fully voice acted and Grounded, which makes interactions feel more natural as you aren't having to read a wall of text, and while the repeated one-liners from the teens can get annoying after a while, I'll take them over none at all. Currently in Smalland, you have to read every word of text, and your character doesn't say anything while exploring, making the game feel slightly less immersive. Movement in Grounded feels pretty good and jumping feels natural. In Smalland, the jumping feels very floaty and has caused nearly every one of my deaths in the game. Both games have hills or holes that bugs come out of, but only Grounded, at least right now, allows you to enter and explore them. You can follow the ants into their hill, take the resources they are hoarding, and discover other secrets hidden under the surface of the world. There are numerous anthills in Smalland, as well as holes other creatures come and go from, but you can't enter them. Grounded has a massive koi pond as one of its many biomes, and you can swim on the surface to cross it, or dive down into it to collect resources and as part of the story. Currently, you can't swim in Smalland, and it feels like an artificial obstacle to prevent you from exploring. While this might not appeal to everyone, I like base defenses in survival games, and even though I think they could be improved, Grounded has 2 variations of them. Your base can get attacked if you anger specific factions intruding in their territory too long, or by killing too many of them. There are also mixers scattered around the backyard that can be defended, and a base defense story quest. In Smalland, your base can be attacked if you build on the ground, but you can completely avoid them by building up in one of the great trees, and there are currently no traps to help defend your base anyway. Both games of course have food systems, with Grounded also having smoothies and Smalland having potions. The food and smoothie systems in Grounded are much better in my opinion, with most foods also providing some type of buff, in addition to managing hunger and thirst. The foods in Smalland only help manage nourishment, which is a combination of hunger and thirst, and the cost of making them isn't balanced all that well. For example, you can easily get mushrooms or antheads to make the first tier of food and never run out of them, or you can collect 3 different resources to make other tier 1 foods to get the same benefit. Don't get me wrong, the food system in Grounded isn't perfect, but it's far better than the food system in Smalland right now. Grounded has mutations, which if you watch my Grounded content, you'll likely know I think mostly aren't that impactful, but Smalland has nothing similar. There are some mutations in Grounded that have noticeable impact on gameplay, such as Natural Explorer providing more movement speed, and Smalland would do well to add something similar. Now let's take a quick look at what Smalland does better than Grounded. Smalland has character customization with quite a few options, and while this isn't a feature that greatly appeals to me, I know it does for many others. A common question and request during early access for Grounded was to be able to customize the teens, and as of this recording, that feature hasn't been added or even mentioned as coming in the future. Both games have co-op, but Smalland allows for up to 10 players to be in the world at the same time, while Grounded has a max of 4. Having more than 4 players per world was also a frequently requested feature that I don't see ever occurring in Grounded. Smalland also has the most requested feature that players wanted in Grounded: mounts. Currently, you can tame and ride 4 different creatures in Smalland, with the one you'll most likely tame first being Grasshopper. This allows for much faster travel, as well as getting down to places that would take much longer to reach. There's also a flying mount with another plan for the first content update, meaning you can travel around the map much faster than you can in Grounded. One of my biggest gripes with Grounded, especially at full release, was that it felt like more than half my playtime was spent walking to and from locations. This could be mitigated by building ziplines, but they took quite a while to build, and it wasn't until after full release that the game added the ability to go both ways on ziplines. While I understand that exploration is one of the best parts of a survival game, after I've seen everything, I prefer to be able to get around as quickly as possible, and mounts allow that much better than ziplines. Smalland also has a grapple gun and wingsuit which allow for faster travel, and all in all it has far better traversal options. Another highly requested feature, and one that was on the feature board even after full release but has since been removed for Grounded, was a weather system. Smalland has both weather and seasons. You'll likely experience a bad rainstorm in the first couple of hours playing Smalland, which will require you to take shelter to avoid freezing to death. Later on, winter will roll in with snow covering the ground, requiring you to either wear warmer armor or eat foods that increase your temperature. Grounded does have the pond, haze, and sandbox, which require you to use specific gear to explore, but I and many others wanted the weather system, or at the very least for the sprinklers to turn on, rather than having every day be sunny. Last but not least, Smalland has a unique base building mechanic that I personally haven't seen in any other games I've played. You can build on the ground in Smalland, but you're really supposed to build on top of the great trees. These giant trees are scattered around the map, and you can claim one to build your base on. While this is interesting enough, the coolest feature is you can simply go to any great tree, claim it, and your base will move intact to it. I know this might not be something everyone is interested in, as setting up small outposts can be enjoyable and challenging, but for me it's a massive quality of life feature. Before I give my opinion on which game is better, I want to briefly discuss a few things both games do okay but could do better. First up is base building. Both games have quite a few options for base building and decorating your base, but none of it really matters that much. In Grounded, you can finish the game without ever building a wall outside of the one story quest I mentioned earlier. In fact, I did a complete playthrough after full release and didn't build a base. All of my stuff was on lily pads in the koi pond, and while it wasn't my intention to not build a base, I just never got around to it. In Smalland, you do need a roof over your bed to sleep, and your crafting station will take damage over time from weather if they are not sheltered, but you can simply throw up a bunch of foundations with a wall and roof pieces to protect them. This seems to be common in many survival games where they have a robust base building system, but it's mostly cosmetic. I'd love to see more traps to defend bases in both games, as well as raids being added to Smalland. Next up are the gear systems. I've talked in length about how much I dislike the armor and weapon upgrade systems in Grounded, and how the original system felt much better, so I won't rehash that here. Smalland has a similar issue, however. Instead of being super grindy to get good gear, you simply get it so quickly it feels like gear doesn't matter that much. In less than an hour, you can get armor and weapons that will carry you through the first half of the game. Shortly thereafter, you unlock the next tier of weapons, which will make combat, something I'll get back to in a minute, trivial. I think both games would do well to meet somewhere in the middle, where it doesn't take hours of grinding resources to upgrade gear to be worthwhile, and you can't simply get it so quickly that it removes any challenge from the normal combat. Lastly, I have to talk about combat. Grounded combat gets pretty boring pretty quickly because once you learn how to perfect block, or parry as it's called in other games, you can win every normal fight. Smalland doesn't have parrying, but it does have dodge rolls. You have 2 options. One is to attack, roll away, and repeat until you win. The second is to face tank the enemy and hope you kill before it kills you. Grounded needs the dodge roll and Smalland needs the parry. Combat in both games doesn't feel that great and gets boring very quickly. Those are all the things I think each game does well, does poorly, and could improve upon. I think it's more likely changes will occur in Smalland since it's early access, but that's not a guarantee, and even if the changes come, how long will they take? Grounded released bare bones and was in early access for a little over 2 years. Smalland feels much more complete with a current plan of 6 months to a year of early access. Personally, I think even if the story is 75% complete, that's quite an ambitious schedule, and I expect it to be in early access for at least 2 years. So which game is better? This isn't an apples-to-apples comparison because one game is fully released and the other isn't. Smalland could look totally different a year or two from now. Right now, however, if you ask me which game I would recommend playing if you could only play one, it will be Grounded. It's a complete game and feels far more polished, at least when playing solo or as a host. In a year or two when Smalland is finished, if it somehow surpasses Grounded, I'll make an updated video. If you made it this far, thanks so much. If you found this video informative, please click the like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this.